After the class continues, switch on the broadcast. You know what to do is in the corner it says unbroadcast.
I tried it last time, but I didn't press the start broadcast and set it right, so it didn't record.
Right, so you click on unbroadcast and then you have to click again.
Yeah.
Like.
Brahmachari Mahapurusha ki, Shri Tulsinath Maharaj ki, Shri Giridhar Lal ki, Shri Nisardev Bhagavan ki.
Yeah, click that.
You know how to go down and stuff?
Yeah.
Shall I that microphone on here? Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Jaya Gopi Janavara Jaya Gopi Janavara Parampara ki, Anant Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki, Rancha Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Jai Gaur Premanandi. Reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita at home in India. At home in India in Johannesburg. October the 12th. Srila Prabhupada's arrival at the Johannesburg airport was culturally extraordinary for South Africa. White men bowing down before an Indian. The devotees had borrowed a yellow Mercedes-Benz and had parked it in a spot reserved for state ministers and other dignitaries. No one objected. As Srila Prabhupada arrived, devotees threw flower petals. Some European onlookers bowed down, and the police, impressed by all the protocol, saluted Srila Prabhupada and respectfully opened the door to his Mercedes. As in Durban, Prabhupada's lectures were well attended. He was keen to have his books sold during these programs, and he would go to the book booths and ask his disciples, "Are they buying the books?" He was concerned that the Europeans, not just the Hindus, buy the books. Prabhupada spoke strongly against racial discrimination, but unlike Mahatma Gandhi, who had been imprisoned in South Africa for his outspoken views, Prabhupada spoke on the authority of scripture. "What is this black-white business?" he said. "It is nonsense. It is the bodily concept of life." In South Africa, such statements would ordinarily have been considered volatile politics, yet everyone appreciated Srila Prabhupada because he spoke on a purely spiritual level. One of Prabhupada's disciples in South Africa, Riddha, asked privately how to deal with the racial issue in Johannesburg. The only solution, Prabhupada said, was mass Harinam Sankirtan. When Riddha asked about starting a farm community, Prabhupada replied, "Don't be so eager to move out to the country. Preaching is in the cities." He said he was very pleased with what his disciples had done in South Africa within such a short time. While Prabhupada was in Johannesburg, Rameshwara and company fulfilled their promise and reached him with copies of both volumes of the 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada took the books with him to his lecture at one university and quoted from them, speaking on Lord Rishabhadev's instructions, beginning with the verse in which Rishabhadev advises his sons not to live for sense gratification. Srila Prabhupada ki.
Yeah.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 9, the Supreme Character of Jad Bharat, Text 4. Tasyapi ahava atmajasya vipra putra snehanubadhamana asamavatanat samskaram yatopadesham viradana upanitasya cha puna shocha chamanadin kamanyaman anabipretan api samasikshayad anashishtena hi bhavyam pitu putri neti. Please repeat. Tasya, of him. Apihava, certainly. Atmajasya, of his son. Vipra, the Brahman father of Jad Bharat. Mad, crazy Bharat. Putra Sneha, Anubhadra, Mana, who was obliged by affection for his son.
Who was obliged by affection for his son.
Asama Avartanat,
Asana Avartanat.
until the end of the Brahmachari ashram.
Until the end of the Brahmacharya ashram.
Samskaran,
Samskaram.
the purificatory processes.
The purificatory processes.
Yata Upadesham,
Yata Upadesham.
as prescribed in the Shastras.
As prescribed in the Shastras.
Vidadhana,
Vidadhana.
performing. Upanitasya,
Upanitasya.
of one who has a sacred thread.
Of one who has a sacred thread.
Cha, also. Puna, again. Socha Achamana Adin,
Socha Achamana Adin.
practice of cleanliness.
Practice of cleanliness.
Washing of the mouth.
Washing of the mouth.
Legs and hands, etc.
Legs and hands, etc.
Karma Niyaman,
Karma Niyaman.
the regulative principles of fruitive activities.
The regulative principles of fruitive activities.
Anabhipretan,
Anabhipretan.
happy, although not wanted by Jadbharat.
Although not wanted by Jadbharat.
Samasikshayat,
Samashikshayat.
taught. Anushishtena, taught to follow the regulative principles.
Taught to follow the regulative principles.
He, indeed. Bhavyam, should be. Pitu, from the father. Putrena, the son. Iti, thus. Translation. The Brahman's father's mind was always filled with affection for his son Jadbharat, Bharat Maharaj. Therefore he was always attached to Jadbharat. Because Jadbharat was unfit to enter the Grihastra ashram, he simply executed the purificatory process up to the end of the Brahmacharya ashram. Although Jadbharat was unwilling to accept his father's instructions, the Brahmin nonetheless instructed him in how to keep clean and how to wash, thinking that the son should be taught by the father. Please repeat. The Brahman's father's mind was always filled with affection for his son. Jadbharat, Bharat Maharaj. Therefore he was always attached to Jadbharat. Because Jadbharat was unfit to enter the Grihastra ashram, he simply executed the purificatory process up to the end of the Brahmacharya ashram. Although Jadbharat was unwilling to accept his father's instructions, the Brahman nonetheless instructed him in how to keep clean and how to wash, thinking that the son should be taught by the father. Purport by Srila Prabhupada ki. Jadbharat was Bharat Maharaj in the body of a Brahmin, and he outwardly conducted himself as if he were dull, deaf and blind. Dull, deaf, dumb and blind. Actually, he was quite alert within. He knew perfectly well of the results of fruitive activity and the results of devotional service. In the body of a Brahmin, Maharaj Bharat was completely absorbed in devotional service within. Therefore, it was not at all necessary for him to execute the regulative principles of fruitive activity. As confirmed in Srimad Bhagavatam, Swanishtitasya dharmasya samsadi haritoshnam, Bhagavatam 1-2-13. One has to satisfy Hari, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the perfection of the regulative principles of fruitive activity. Besides that, it is stated in Srimad Bhagavatam, Dhamma swanishtita pungsam vishvaksena katasriya natpadayad yadi ratim shrama evahi kevalam. Duties dharma executed by men regardless of occupation, are only so much useless labour. Duties dharma executed by men, regardless of occupation, are only so much useless labour if they do not provoke attraction for the message of the Supreme Lord. Bhagavatam 128. These karma kanda activities are required as long as one has not developed Krishna consciousness. If one has developed in Krishna consciousness, there is no need to execute the prior regulative principles of karma kanda. Srila Madhavendra Puri said, "Oh, regulative principles of karma kanda, please excuse me. I cannot follow all these regulative principles, for I am fully engaged in devotional service." He expressed the desire to sit somewhere beneath a tree and continue chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. Consequently, he did not execute all the regulative principles. Similarly, Haridas Thakur was born in a Mohammedan family. From the very beginning of his life, he was never trained in the karma kanda system. But because he was always chanting the holy name of the Lord, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu accepted him as Namacharya, the authority in chanting the holy name. As Jad Bharat, Bharat Maharaj was always engaged in devotional service within his mind. Since he had executed the regulative principles continuously for 3 lives, he was not interested in continuing to execute them, although his Brahmin father wanted him to do so. Omagyanatvarandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshirunlitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayarupakadamayam Dadati Swapatantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Tapadakam Nam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Sam Sachivam Sarvetam Savadutam Virijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitam Shah Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasubhyevcha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Sari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So there's an important point at the end of this purport that Srila Prabhupada makes. Since Bharat Maharaj, Jad Bharat, had executed the regulative principles continuously for 3 lives, he was not interested in continuing to execute them, although his Brahmin father wanted him to do so. So this pastime is an extraordinary pastime, and it can be used to illustrate many important points, but there are some points that it can't be used to illustrate. Because it's described that Jad Bharat's father was a very qualified Brahmin. He was he belonged to the dynasty of Angira. He was fully qualified with Brahminical qualifications. He could control his mind and senses. He had studied the Vedic literatures and other subsidiary literatures. He was expert in giving charity, and he was always satisfied, tolerant, very gentle, learned, and non-envious. He was self-realized and engaged in the devotional service of the Lord. He always remained in trance. So he's a very advanced Brahmin who's not a Brahma Bandhu. He's not someone who is negligent of the purpose of the Vedas. He understands the Vedas. So we can't use this example of Jad Bharat as a reason not to follow the instructions of Brahmins who are correctly applying Vedic principles. in the course of our preaching, we may encounter Brahmins from other sampradayas or from other branches of the Brahma Sampradaya. And many of those Brahmins have studied sections of the Vedas and are endeavouring to follow the principles of the Shastras and the Bhagavad Gita, and they've accepted Diksha in the proper process. So we can't use this behaviour of Bharat Maharaj of Chad Bharat as an example that we can follow in this regard. However, we can also see from this verse in question that we're studying today that this Brahmin seemed to be somewhat overcome by his affection for his son. Srila Prabhupada doesn't say whether that affection was due to Chad Bharat's exalted character as being a pure devotee of Krishna, and he was internally meditating with Krishna in his mind, internally meditating in the heart. But we can understand from the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Krishna, who were that when they were children, even though they also were often very naughty and often disturbed the social community activities. For example, when the Brahmin came to Jagannath Mishra's house and Lord Chaitanya ate the offerings, so many things, and Lord Chaitanya was always causing trouble for his parents in certain ways because of his naughty behaviour. But because of his, even though they weren't aware of his identity at that time, but still because of their deep affection for him, they continued to have, it didn't disturb them. So Srila Prabhupada doesn't say that here. So we could give the Brahmin the benefit of the doubt and say that because Chad Bharat was such an exalted devotee, then the Brahmin was attracted to him because of his spiritual qualities. But we could also take the example that he's attracted to him because he's his son, and because of that, then he lost his intelligence, really, that he was trying to train him, but he wasn't actually learning the lesson that Chad Bharat was presenting, that one who's already fulfilled, one who's already on the self-realized platform, need no longer execute the regulative principles, but he does so just to set an example. So Chad Bharat wasn't setting an example because he'd already set an example as a king for many thousands of years, and he'd renounced that to take up exclusive devotional service. So he wasn't going to go back to setting an example again. Chad Bharat is setting the example of attaining perfection and going back to Godhead. So we're in an interesting situation in ISKCON because Srila Prabhupada is simultaneously trying to set both examples for us and give us the impetus to simultaneously set both examples, to create a society, because in the absence of Vaishnav kings and Vaishnav administrators, then there's no one to create a society in which people can learn the regulative principles and gradually become elevated to a platform of steadiness, where they can execute devotional service with a peaceful mind. So because Srila Prabhupada saw that his disciples struggled to come to that platform of Nishta, then he considered that it may be necessary to establish varnashram. And he actually did come to that conclusion. Now devotees are trying to help us rise to that platform of Nishtha, so that we can actually simultaneously engage in Srila Prabhupada's preaching mission to establish communities which can encourage neophyte devotees to practice regulative principles, and also which can actually set a model to society to enable society to see that there is a workable model by which the citizens can work cooperatively together for a higher goal. But as we can see from the Bhagavatam, even in previous yugas, many kings became attached to fruitive activities, became attached to the Karmakanda rituals and lost sight of the goal. Or rather, they didn't have the association of pure devotees who could keep them in touch with the goal. Srila Prabhupada definitely was such a person who simultaneously played the role of the supreme manager of the society and the supreme spiritual master. So in that sense he was a real acharya, he was the real samstapaka acharya. Similarly, if you read the lives of Ramanujacharya and Madhvacharya, you'll see that they also simultaneously established a spiritual society based on principles that could last for many generations. It's interesting how Mahatma Prabhu is now giving us this resilience course, which he begins the course by saying that you can't make progress, yo-yos don't make progress in spiritual life. And because he studied many systems of management, so those systems of management may appear to some as being like modern things, but they're bound to have been based on the experience of managers who originally gained their experience of working within a very structured system, quite similar to the Varnashram system. And in fact, the Varnashram system always exists eternally. It's just covered over at different times. So it's not that we should think that these principles can't be utilized. Srila Prabhupada quotes two verses which are very relevant in this regard from the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Yatha bhundi advaita shreshta varnashrama vibhagasa srinishtastasya dharmasya samsiddhi haritoshnam. Or best from the thrice-born, it is therefore concluded that the best thing one can do in the execution of one's duties in terms of varna and ashram is to please the personality of Godhead. And then the other verse, Dharma srinishkita pumusam vishvapsiddhakata sriyana padiyadiyadivati nishrama evihi kevalam. Duties, dharma, executed by men regardless of occupation, are only so much useless labor if they do not provoke attraction for the message of the Supreme Lord. So both these verses present the necessity to perform one's occupational duties while simultaneously meditating on the goal, which is to gain attraction for the message of the Supreme Lord. And actually, in the verse Samsiddhi Haritoshanam, Srila Prabhupada says one has to satisfy Hari, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That it's not even something you can think about, it's not even something you can leave to the future. But actually, even if you haven't come to the platform of a Shakti, actual attachment to Krishna, hearing Krishna's pastimes and performing devotional service with spontaneous attachment, But still you have to meditate, you have to contemplate, am I satisfying Krishna by my activities? So when we're on the platform of Vaidhi Bhakti, we can understand that we're satisfying Krishna by our activities in faithfully and painstakingly serving the mission of the Guru. And because all of our Gurus in ISKCON are serving Srila Prabhupada's mission, and even if it's not always clear what our own spiritual master's mission is, because we're not really encouraged to sort of study the minutes of the GBC or get involved in understanding what all the spiritual masters are doing in terms of their interaction with each other. But we do know that they're all serving Srila Prabhupada's mission. And so Srila Prabhupada's mission is for the devotees to come together, to have a strong sadhana, and also to preach to others, to cooperate with the leaders in the society, to assist the preaching, but also to take advantage of the facilities that ISKCON is providing to increase our own sadhana, to improve our own sadhana. And I was just, last night I was reading from Srimad Bhakti Chintamani, the final part of the book, which describes, tells the story of two devotees, Chichananda and Gaurahari, who go through brahmacharya ashram life and grihastha ashram life, and go through various stages of service to the institution, while at the same time coming to terms with their internal development. It struck me that it was just the way it's described was a long process, and a process which quite often was a difficult process, in the sense that neither of the two candidates for pure devotional service were confident that they were going to attain the goal at all times, and that they felt, there was some doubt in their minds that it was going to be possible for them. And it specifically also was talking about certain challenges that are there within an institution. And that within an institution there are often conflicting opinions about the best way to manage the institution, and even sometimes there's philosophical misunderstandings which lead to contrary opinions, which sometimes can become volatile and like risk devotees committing offences to each other. So all of those topics were covered in that kind of leela in Srimad Bhakti Chintamani. And for some reason it inspired me to read a book that I borrowed from Ramananda, which is Jiva Goswami's commentary on the first canto of the Krama Sandarbha. So I just wanted to read a little from this. So this is Jiva Goswami's purport to the verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Atapambi dvidra shreshta varnashrama vibhagasha srinusutasya dharmasya samsiddhi haritoshanam. O best of the Brahmins, the complete perfection of Dharma, according to the divisions of varnashram by men, is pleasing the Lord. So that's Jiva Goswami's translation, commentary from Bhakti Sandarbha 7. The words Shruta Grihiteya Muniya and Shranadana show that bhakti is hard to attain. By hearing the conclusions of all scriptures from an authorized guru, one attains it. Thus, hearing from the guru is understood to be the most necessary practice for the individual. So I thought that was nice, because before I read that, having read my Guru Maharaj's book, I thought this was nice. By hearing the conclusions of all scriptures from an authorized guru, one attains bhakti. So we're fortunate that our Guru Maharaj has spent so many years doing just this, studying the Shastras and the commentaries of the Acharyas, and coming to conclusions and presenting Srila Prabhupada's books in a very scientific way. Not that Srila Prabhupada didn't do that, he definitely did also. The Nectar of Devotion is very scientific present, like rewriting of Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. But because Srila Prabhupada was trying to get all of the books out in his own lifetime, then he didn't take the luxury of writing detailed commentaries on many books, but he's encouraged his disciples to do so. So, so we, by engaging in readings of these books and studying them together, we can understand that at least we're pleasing Jiva Goswami. And it will enable us to discriminate which points to take from particular pastimes. Actually, this point was stressed in a podcast I listened to recently, between the Wisdom of the Sages podcast with Kaustuba and Raghunath Prabhu, who do a very nice presentation. And someone was writing in that many of the examples seemed very extreme. And Kaustuba was saying that, they're extreme because they're meant to illustrate particular points. And you have to understand what points they're trying to illustrate. So our Guru Maharaj also says this is why it's very important to read Srila Prabhupada's books over and over again, scrutinizing them and discuss them, so we can actually understand the point that Srila Prabhupada's making in a particular purport, and not try to construe some other point. Again, Jiva Goswami says, bhakti is attained, that rare bhakti is attained even from performing one's dharma, if dharma is endowed with pleasing the Lord. Pleasing the Lord is the highest result of dharma. So, I thought this was nice because Jad Bharat kind of rejected his father's dharma. It was his father's dharma to educate his child Brahminically. And it wasn't that Jad Bharat couldn't understand or couldn't speak, because later, when he's like in that conversation with Maharaj Rahugana, even though there's no account of Jad Bharat having spoken to anyone for his whole life, he had a very deep philosophical discussion with Maharaj Rahugana. So there was an opportunity for his father to speak with him, but because his father wasn't talking to him about Prema Bhakti, he wasn't talking to him about the pastimes of Krishna, but he was just trying to train him in fruitive activities. And Jad Bharat didn't want anything to do with that. So if we have a reason to be talking about a certain dharma within the varnashram system, according to our managerial duties or our preaching mission, then we should always be conscious that unless we're actually thinking about am I actually pleasing Krishna by this engagement? So it means am I authorized? Am I authorized? And am I in a good state of consciousness? And am I really the right person? Is this really the right time to engage in this activity? And in the next verse, Jiva Goswami translates, therefore, with mind dedicated only to bhakti, devoid of karma and jnana, one should constantly hear about, glorify and meditate upon the Supreme Lord, the Master of the devotees. So I'll stop there. Are there any questions or comments?
There is a reference, Srila Prabhupada says somewhere that you can't cover over Varnashram. So even if people don't want to recognize it and they want to try and make it a classless society, still there'll be some people that will be good at making money, some people that will be more inclined to just gross sensual activity. So it's an artificial thing to try to do that, to try and make it a classless society. And Dr. Vijay Maharaj was saying actually you can have 4 different social systems in operation all at the same time. Communism for the Shudra, capitalism for the Vaishya, monarchy for the Kshatriya, and anarchy for the Brahmin.
Yeah, well, it's interesting actually. Srila Prabhupada in one purport a few weeks ago says that the world seems to have adopted the democratic process now. So if there are qualified Kshatriyas to vote for, then this is a bona fide process in one sense. I was watching a really nice video of the Gurukulas in Mayapur recently, actually, just like maybe a few months ago. And there's 4 boys, I don't know if you've seen that video, but they're about 6 or 7 years old. And they're all like, the devotee who's making the video asked them what's their favourite aspect of Gurukul, and like 2 of them say japa, and when all of the questions they're asked, they answer in amazing ways that indicate that they've got real attachment to the service that they're performing. I think one of the others says he likes fire sacrifices, and another one says he likes cooking. That's it. But they're all like, you can just see it, how effulgent they are. But then when they ask what they'd like to do in the future, one of them says, "I want to open a restaurant." His father's a cook, and another one says, "I want to be a book distributor." 2 of them want to be book distributors. I can't remember the 4th one, but it was. I thought, wow, it's like, just since you mentioned Bhakti Vijay Maharaj there, thinking these children at Gurukul, they're now getting this sort of condensed essence of all of Srila Prabhupada's teachings as it's been handed down, through the 2nd and 3rd generations. Some of their teachers at school are just boys who were graduated probably when they were 16 and they've gone on to start teaching at the Gurukul. So it's like, this is an amazing. It'll be very exciting to see how that unfolds and how that can be adopted as well in other parts of the world. So that's a nice example actually that you gave there. I've heard that before. Anarchy for the Brahmins, because in one sense the anarchy of the climate, the what do you call it, extinction rebellion and animal rebellion. These are like Shudras trying to be Brahmins, or maybe they're Vaishyas trying to be Brahmins. Rather than criticize the sort of principles of anarchism, then we can present, okay, if you really want a society in which you're self-determined, in which you really feel you want to do the best for all living entities, okay, then adopt the Brahminical principles, adopt the principles of control of the mind, control of the senses, not being envious towards any of the living entities. Or if you want to have a big business and give all of your money to charity to provide clean water to children in Africa, okay, but you need to follow certain principles also. Certainly, Bhakti Charan Raj, he was working with the United Nations for several years. Other devotees are working, on different levels of government. And now with the pandemic situation, governments are being forced to let the population know that it's necessary to control social senses and social minds, even if people are not thinking about doing it privately, but in terms of... So there's an opportunity now in our preaching to show how previous societies were able to have these different sections working together. And it's interesting. There are, even though it may seem that the governments only give money to pharmaceutical companies and oil companies and farmers, that they do also give a certain amount of money to universities who are studying different social models. They get a certain amount of money is invested in looking at different political theories and different economic models. So there are different opportunities for preaching, all from this pastime of Bharat Maharaj. Thanks very much for helping share the nectar. Granthsahib Sri Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Nitai Gaur Premananda, Hari Hari Bol. Motivation Vrinda ki, Jai.
After you